Sunlight cut through the hotel curtains with no mercy, slicing straight across Frank's face like it had been waiting all night to expose him. He winced, turning over with the slow, heavy movement of a man bracing himself for disappointment. His mind was foggy, the type of haze that hinted at trouble before memory even had a chance to wake up. He expected cold sheets, an empty bed, a headache with no witnesses. Instead, he froze. A woman lay beside him, not close enough to suggest anything happened, but close enough that his heart slammed against his ribs. Her presence was so unexpected that for a moment his breath stalled in his chest. Jessica, a woman he didn't recognize, whose beauty hit him before logic could even assemble itself. Her skin caught the morning light in warm, gentle tones. Her features were calm, peaceful, untouched by panic. She looked like someone resting after a long night, not someone who should have been anywhere near him. Frank's eyes widened, his throat tightened, his pulse kicked hard. What happened? His internal alarms began firing all at once. Confusion, shock, a grip of anxiety tightening around his chest. He lifted the blanket slowly, terrified of what he might see. Both of them were fully clothed. Not a button undone. Not a single sign of intimacy. Just two strangers in a room that didn't belong to either one of them. His panic didn't disappear. It changed shape. Now it wasn't fear of what they had done. It was fear of why they were here at all. His voice barely left his throat as he whispered, "Where am I?" Jessica shifted slightly, still unaware of the chaos unraveling inside him. Frank sat up, one hand pressed to his forehead, steadying himself as a wave of questions crashed in. Have you ever woken up and had no idea where you were? Have you ever opened your eyes and felt the weight of a night you couldn't remember? Have you ever stared at a moment so confusing that your first instinct was to run, even though you didn't know what you were running from? Frank didn't just feel those questions. They lived in his chest now, his thoughts scattered like loose papers caught in the wind. He squeezed his eyes, trying to find even a hint of clarity. What had happened after the dinner? How much had he actually drunk? Who had walked him back to this room? How did he end up beside this woman, whose name he didn't even know? And another wave hit him. Not visual, not fully formed, but strong enough to shake him. He remembered fragments. A hallway, his phone slipping from his hand, his voice raised, not in anger, but in pain. He remembered saying, "I'm done," but he couldn't remember who he said it to, or why. He was still trying to make sense of the scattered pieces when Jessica's voice drifted out, soft but carrying personality. "Why are you breathing like somebody stole your wallet?" Frank snapped his head toward her, startled. Her eyes were open now, warm brown and sharper than he expected. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't flustered. She was amused. He stared at her, I didn't know you were awake." "Well," she murmured, adjusting her hair, "I wasn't. But your stress woke me up." That did not help his nerves. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. "What is this place?" Jessica gave him a steady look, the kind someone gives when they know more than they're ready to share. "This isn't your room," she said. He blinked. "It's not yours either?" "Nope." His heart kicked again. "Whose room is this?" Jessica stretched, sitting up slowly. "That's the part you're not ready for yet." The words landed heavier than he expected. She wasn't joking. Something was wrong. Not dangerous, but wrong in a way that made his stomach tighten. He couldn't remember how he got here. He couldn't remember talking to her. He couldn't remember why they walked into the wrong room. Fragments returned in flashes. The phone, the words, "I'm done." Someone telling him to stop running. A hallway that didn't feel like home. A door he opened without thinking. He had been emotional. But why? And what had he said to Jessica last night? He looked at her more closely. She wasn't judging him. She wasn't alarmed. She was studying him like she already understood what he didn't. Jessica finally spoke again, tone softer this time. "You were carrying more than alcohol last night, Frank." He tensed. "What do you mean?" "There's what liquor does to a man," she said. "And then there's what pain does. Last night, you weren't just drunk. You were hurting. You said things you don't remember. Things I'm not sure you're ready to hear." Her words settled over him like a weight. Not crushing, but real. He didn't know which scared him. What he said, or why he said it. Before he could respond, she lifted a hand slightly. "But before we get too deep, you should probably know we're not the only ones aware of this little situation." Frank's heartbeat stumbled. "What do you mean?" Jessica nodded toward the door. "We weren't exactly subtle walking in here last night. Hotel security footage, strangers entering a room that wasn't theirs. His reputation, his position as a CEO, his image, everything he spent years protecting, suddenly felt like it was slipping from his fingers." Jessica watched the realization hit him and added gently, "This isn't just about you drinking too much, Frank. There's more to this story than what you remember." She paused, then continued, "And trust me, whatever happened before you got here, it wasn't nothing." The mystery tightened its grip around him. Something had happened. Something emotional. Something he didn't want to face last night. And still might not be ready for today. Jessica's gaze held his, like she could see the questions gathering behind his eyes. "When you're ready," she said quietly, "I'll tell you exactly what you said. But you have to promise not to panic." His voice cracked slightly. "Why would I panic?" She exhaled slowly. "Because truth hits harder than a hangover. Jessica glanced toward the unseen camera and added, with a small smile, "Before we continue this wild story, don't forget to like and comment. YouTube won't push this video unless you show some love." The screen would naturally transition here, just as the gravity of the morning settled into Frank's chest. And now, welcome to Mr. Michael Stories Hub, where America's greatest stories and life lessons meet creativity and heart. If you're new to the family, we're grateful to have you here. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more unforgettable stories your way. Frank remained seated at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, trying to slow his breathing. The sunlight no longer felt like the biggest threat in the room. His own memory did. Every time he reached for answers, they slipped through his fingers like weak signals fading in and out. Jessica pushed her curls back, watching him with a calm he didn't understand. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't scrambling for explanations. She was steady, as if she had already made peace with this strange morning. "Okay," she said, stretching her legs out. "Tell me what you do. Remember, start small." Frank pressed his fingertips against his temples. "It's all chopped, bits and pieces, like someone shuffled moments around in my head." He shut his eyes, reaching for clarity. "I remember being at the dinner, drinking more than I meant to, faces blurred, voices echoing." Jessica nodded. "All right, keep going." He exhaled slowly. "I remember walking down a hallway. Not this one. Another floor. I remember saying something into my phone, something heated, then dropping it." "That tracks," she said gently. "Your phone was committed to a dramatic exit." He looked at her, half confused. "You saw me drop it?" "Oh, I saw the whole event," she said. "You were leaning against the wall, like you were giving a TED Talk to nobody. Then your phone slid out of your hand, like it was tired of your speech." Despite his anxiety, the corner of his mouth twitched. "It wasn't my best moment." "No," she agreed lightly, "but it definitely had character." He took another breath. How did you find me?" Jessica crossed one leg over the other, composure effortless. "I came out of my room to get ice. My throat was sore. I saw you wandering like you were trying to decode the carpet pattern. Then you started talking to the plant near the elevator." Frank covered his face. Please tell me that's not true." "Oh, it's very true," she said, amused. "You thanked it for its support. You told it life had been hard, but you appreciated its consistency." He groaned deeply. "Look," she continued, softening, "I couldn't just leave you there. You were clearly overwhelmed, so I followed you down the hallway to make sure you didn't fall or walk into a wall." "I appreciate that," he murmured. "Well," she added, "that part was fine. The real issue came when you insisted you were opening your room door." Frank's brows pinched. "But it wasn't my door." "Nope, and it wasn't yours. Not even close." He blinked. "So why did it open?" Jessica sighed lightly. "I think you grabbed the wrong keycard from the desk. You were confident the door was yours. Confident enough that when it clicked open you said, 'See? Destiny works.'" He stared into space. "Destiny works. Oh, yeah," she said. "You walked inside like you owned the place. Then you pointed at the bed and said the ceiling was spinning. You fell onto it, fully clothed, and knocked out in seconds." Frank rubbed the back of his neck, embarrassment prickling. "And you stayed?" Jessica shrugged. "I wasn't going to leave you alone like that. You looked exhausted, not dangerous. Plus you mumbled about needing someone to stop gravity for you. I figured you shouldn't choke on your tie while fighting planets." He shook his head slowly. "This is unreal." "Not unreal," she corrected. "Just unfortunate." Frank looked around the room again. The unfamiliar furniture, the misplaced suitcase that didn't belong to them, the view that wasn't his. "So we entered a room that wasn't ours," he said quietly. "Exactly," she replied. "And we didn't realize it until morning." A knot tightened in his stomach. What if the person who actually booked this room? Jessica raised a hand. "We'll deal with that in a minute. But first, you need to breathe. You didn't hurt anyone. You didn't do anything reckless. You were just overwhelmed and lost in the wrong hallway." Her words were steady, grounding. But before he could respond, a knock echoed sharply through the door, firm and deliberate. Jessica's eyes met his. "Well," she whispered, "looks like part 3 just arrived." The knock struck the door a second time, sharper than the first, firm in a way that sent a cold jolt through Frank's chest. It wasn't the gentle tap of housekeeping or someone passing by. It carried purpose. Jessica stood from the bed, crossing her arms loosely. "Go ahead," she murmured. "It's your turn to deal with whatever this is." Frank swallowed, nerves rising like heat under his collar. He approached the door slowly, each step heavier than the last. His hand hesitated on the handle. Nothing about this morning suggested good news. He cracked the door open. A hotel staff member stood in the hallway, posture straight, expression calm but alert, the kind of look someone wears when they're here because a situation requires attention, not courtesy. "Sir," the staffer said. "May I come in?" Frank stepped aside, letting him enter. Jessica watched, with her brows raised, her stance relaxed, but ready. The staffer held a clipboard against his chest. He scanned the room briefly before looking at Frank. "We had a report filed early this morning," he began, voice professional. "A guest contacted the front desk, concerned about an unexpected entry into their room." Frank's stomach dropped. Jessica pursed her lips. "Let me guess," she said. "This is that room." The staffer nodded once. Correct? Frank closed his eyes for a moment. I can explain. I'm sure you can, the staffer said gently. But first, I need to show you something. He flipped the clipboard around. Clipped to the front was a printed screenshot, a frame captured from the hotel's security cameras, time-stamped, clear enough to leave no room for denial. It showed Frank leaning heavily on Jessica as the two of them entered the room sometime after 2 in the morning. Frank stared at the image, heart pounding in his ears. Jessica leaned closer, squinting. Well, she said flatly, at least we look coordinated. Frank shot her a look. She shrugged, unfazed. What? I'm just saying. I've seen worse photos. The staffer cleared his throat. The guest was not inside at the time. They discovered signs of entry when they returned later, and immediately notified us. They've requested to speak with both of you. Frank felt a rush of heat flood his face. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I wasn't in my right mind last night. I didn't realize. The staffer raised a calming hand. You can explain directly. They're waiting in the lounge. Jessica grabbed her cardigan off the chair. All right, she said softly. Let's handle it. Frank couldn't move for a second. The humiliation pressed against him like a weight. This could destroy my reputation, he muttered. Security footage. An unauthorized entry. This is a nightmare. Jessica stepped beside him, lowering her voice. Frank, listen. Her tone carried reassurance. Firm but kind. You messed up. Yes, but nobody got hurt. We didn't touch anything, we didn't take anything, and we didn't cause damage. We're just two tired adults who ended up in the wrong room. We'll explain it and move on. He took a slow breath. You make it sound simple. That's because panicking won't help us walk, she said, and we're already late. The staffer opened the door. Whenever you're ready. Frank nodded reluctantly. Okay, let's go. As Jessica stepped past him, she whispered, next time, try not to charm hotel plants into letting you inside random rooms. He groaned quietly. Please stop reminding me. She smirked. I will. After we survive this. Together they followed the staffer out of the room and down the hallway. The same hallway where Frank's night had fallen apart. The air felt heavier, each step leading them closer to a conversation he never imagined he'd have to face. But this was only the beginning. The real consequences were waiting downstairs. Before we continue this story, don't forget to like, comment, and show some support. It helps the channel reach more people who love a good plot twist. The elevator doors opened. Their morning was just getting started. The walk to the lounge felt longer than it should have. Every step carried the weight of Frank's embarrassment, and the quiet hum of the hallway only amplified the uneasy rhythm of his thoughts. Jessica walked beside him with a measured calm, hands tucked into her cardigan sleeves as if she'd mastered the art of being unbothered. The hotel staffer led them through a wide doorway into the lounge, where early morning guests sat scattered at tables. The atmosphere was gentle, soft clinking of cutlery, low conversation, fresh coffee drifting through the air. Everything looked normal, which made Frank feel even more out of place. "There," the staffer said, nodding toward a table in the corner. A man sat with a mug in his hand, relaxed posture, legs crossed. When he looked up, his expression didn't match the fear Frank had been carrying. No anger, no irritation, just mild curiosity, like someone waiting for a story he already found entertaining. Frank felt his pulse kick. "Oh, no." Jessica nudged him lightly. "Stand up straight. You look like you're headed to confession." He shot her a nervous glance, but straightened anyway. They approached the table. Frank cleared his throat, prepared to stumble through a long apology. "Sir, I am—" The man raised a hand, stopping him. Then, to Frank's confusion, the man chuckled. Not a pity laugh, a genuine one. "Relax," the man said. "Nobody's in trouble." Frank blinked. "You're not upset?" "No," the man replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "I checked the security footage. You weren't exactly sneaking in like a criminal. You were stumbling in like someone desperately trying to find gravity. And she," he nodded at Jessica, "looked like your unwilling bodyguard." Jessica smirked. "That's an accurate description." The man continued. "Security thought it was unusual, of course. Once I saw the footage, it was obvious you weren't causing harm. You just walked into the wrong room." Frank exhaled so deeply it felt like emptying his lungs entirely. "I'm relieved to hear that. I had no intention." "I know," the man said, waving him off. "I travel enough to see strange things at hotels. Yours wasn't malicious, just unfortunate." Jessica leaned forward. "If it helps, we didn't touch anything except the bed. And before you panic, that man fell onto it fully clothed and passed out." The man laughed again. "Oh, I believe you." The staffer beside them nodded, finalizing notes on his clipboard. "Given the guest's response, we'll label the complaint as resolved." He offered a polite smile. "Thank you both for cooperating." After the staffer stepped away, the man stood and stretched. "Honestly, I just wanted to make sure nobody got hurt. And you," he pointed at Frank, "might want to slow down on whatever you drank last night. You were on a mission." Frank rubbed the back of his neck, cheeks warm. "That much is clear." The man shrugged. "No harm done. Just a memorable morning." He lifted his mug in a casual salute before heading toward the breakfast counter. Jessica waited until he was out of earshot before nudging Frank again. "See, not the end of the world." Frank let out a shaky laugh. "You make this sound normal." "It is normal," she said confidently. Life comes with chaos. You're just used to controlling everything. Moments like this force you to deal with inconvenience without collapsing. He sighed. Didn't collapse. You emotionally collapsed, she corrected, with zero hesitation. Your face looked like you were preparing for a lawsuit. He groaned softly. Please stop describing my reactions. No, she said playfully. It builds character. Despite himself, he felt a small smile forming. Her humor worked like a pressure valve, easing what felt too heavy to carry. Jessica adjusted her cardigan. You hungry? Honestly, my stomach hasn't settled yet. Good, she replied, because food will help you stop thinking like you're in danger. Come on. He hesitated. After everything, you want to sit and eat breakfast with me? Yes, she answered, as if the question made no sense. You need someone to remind you that mistakes don't end the world, and I need waffles. So it works out. He laughed, a real one this time, not stiff or weakened by nerves. Together, they turned toward the dining area. Frank's shoulders loosened. The pressure that had choked him earlier felt lighter with each step. For the first time that morning, he didn't feel like running. He felt guided, and Jessica walked beside him like she'd been doing it for years. The dining area was already alive with soft conversation and the quiet rhythm of morning routines. Plates clinked lightly, silverware scraped gently, and the smell of fresh waffles drifted through the air. Jessica walked ahead with a calm confidence, guiding Frank like she'd been appointed his unofficial handler. Frank followed, still trying to settle his nerves. The lounge meeting ended better than he expected, but the embarrassment clung to him like static. Jessica, however, moved with the same steady composure she'd shown since he woke up beside her. She grabbed a plate from the buffet and glanced back at him. Don't just stand there like a lost intern. Get a plate. He blinked. I'm just processing. Well, process while walking, she replied. Food helps thoughts behave. He reached for a plate reluctantly. Jessica loaded hers generously. Eggs, fruit, waffles, sausage, and a small bowl of yogurt balanced perfectly on the edge. She looked at his empty plate and raised a brow. Frank, what are you doing? You planning to nibble on air? I'm not very hungry, he muttered. Your nerves ate your appetite, she said knowingly. Fill the plate. Anyway, you'll thank me once your stomach wakes up. He sighed, but began serving himself small portions of fruit and toast. When they sat, Jessica didn't dive into her food immediately. She studied him first, elbows resting lightly on the table. You look like someone who's waiting for the universe to punish him, she said. Frank ran his thumb along the rim of his cup. I embarrassed myself. I embarrassed someone who had nothing to do with my problems. I'm still trying to figure out how everything spiraled so fast. Nothing spiraled, she corrected gently. Things just happened. You're human. Humans get overwhelmed. Humans get lost. Humans accidentally enter strangers' hotel rooms. Apparently, he lowered his head with a groan. Please don't remind me. She smiled. I'm teasing you because you look like you forgot how to breathe. Frank took a slow breath, grounding himself. He watched her for a moment. The ease in her posture, the warmth in her eyes, the quiet authority in her tone. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't intimidated by him. She simply showed up as herself, which was something he rarely encountered. After a moment, she asked softly, "What was going on last night? Before I found you?" Frank stared at his plate. The question felt heavier than the room around him. "Pressure," he said faintly. "A lot of it? Work?" she asked. He nodded. "Investors, board members, expectations, deadlines, expansion projects. Everyone looking at me like I'm not allowed to falter. I'm supposed to be the steady one, the reliable one, the one who doesn't crack." Jessica cut into her waffle slowly. "Who told you that?" "It's just part of the job," he said. "People depend on me. I don't get the luxury of breaking down." Jessica tapped her fork against her plate lightly. "Frank, perfection is just fear wearing a suit." He paused. Her words slid through him like something that had been searching for a doorway. She continued, her tone calm but firm. "People chase perfection because they're terrified someone will see their flaws. They hide behind achievements, titles, schedules, thinking it'll protect them from judgment. But all it does is build a cage they can't step out of." Frank looked at her, stunned by the clarity of her insight. Jessica added, "Pressure doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're still trying. You're human before you're anyone's CEO." His throat tightened slightly. Nobody in his world ever spoke to him like that. Not colleagues, not advisors, not partners. They admired the image he carried, not the man behind it. Silence settled between them for a moment. Not uncomfortable, but reflective. Frank felt something inside him loosen. Not fully, but enough to breathe easier. Jessica pointed her fork at him. "Eat." He huffed a laugh. "Yes, ma'am." They shared a small smile, the kind that softened the edges of a hard morning. Jessica finally started eating her own food. Frank took a bite of fruit, surprised at how grounding something so simple could feel. "You know," Jessica said casually, "you're a lot quieter when you're sober." He grimaced. "Please don't tell me I talked too much last night." "Oh, you talked," she replied, "but that's for later. One emotional crisis at a time." Frank covered his face with one hand. "I don't know whether to thank you or apologize." "Do both," she said, "but later. For now, finish your breakfast." Despite the ache in his head and the weight of the unknown still hovering over him, Frank found himself smiling. Not forced, not polite, but real. For the first morning in a long time, he felt something resembling steadiness, and somehow Jessica was the source of it. Breakfast plates sat between them, half finished, as the morning continued quietly around the dining area. The clatter of other guests, the shuffle of feet, the soft hum of conversation. None of it reached Frank. He was too busy staring at a spot on the table, barely noticing the fruit he'd pushed around with his fork. Jessica watched him, recognizing the shift. Something in his expression had changed. Not fear this time, but recognition. A memory rising from beneath the fog. "Frank," she asked gently, "where'd you go just now?" He didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened slightly, and his breathing slowed, focused. Then he pressed his palm to his forehead and whispered, "It came back." Jessica leaned forward. "What did?" He swallowed. His voice was steadier than he expected. "I remember yelling." Her eyes softened. "From last night?" "Yes," he said. "Not at you, not at anyone in the hallway, but into my phone." He looked up at her, unsettled. "I wasn't just drunk. I was upset." Jessica lowered her fork, giving him her full attention. "What were you saying?" He took a moment, searching for the exact words, pulling them up like fragile pieces he wasn't sure he wanted to handle. "I remember saying, 'I'm done.'" The words came out almost as a confession. Jessica didn't interrupt him. Frank continued, voice low. "I said, I can't do this anymore." And something about expectations. And someone telling me to stop running. Jessica's brows furrowed gently. "Running from what?" "I don't know," he admitted, tension creeping back into his shoulders. "But I remember the tone of my voice. It wasn't frustration. It was something breaking." Jessica nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "So you weren't just drunk," she murmured. "You were overwhelmed and trying to say something you'd been holding for a long time." Frank's chest tightened. But why did it hit all at once? Why last night? She held her breath for a moment, studying him, not judging, not assuming, just observing the man unraveling a truth he'd tried to bury. People don't collapse under pressure because of one bad moment, she said softly. They collapse because of 100 moments stacked on top of each other. Last night was just the moment that tipped the pile. Frank looked at her, emotions shifting like unsettled dust. "I shouldn't have lost control like that." Jessica shook her head. "Losing control doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He exhaled shakily. "I can't believe I did all that in public." "You didn't," she said. "You got emotional in a hallway at 2 a.m. Trust me, nobody pays attention to anything at 2 a.m. Her attempt at humor made him smile, faintly. But the heaviness didn't lift. Jessica folded her hands, tone more serious. "Frank, listen to me. That call meant something. Even if you don't remember who you spoke to, your heart does. It came out last night because you couldn't hold it back anymore. He forced himself to meet her eyes. Do you think I said something I'll regret? She hesitated, not out of fear, but because she understood the weight of honesty. I think, she said slowly, you said something you needed to say. Maybe not the way you intended, but the truth has a way of finding its moment, even when we're not ready. Frank let the words settle, feeling both exposed and relieved. Jessica picked up her napkin, twisting it slightly. Frank, whatever happened before I found you, it wasn't small. It wasn't just bad drinks or stress. Something emotional happened, something real, and it pushed you to your limit. She paused, letting the silence fill the space between them. Whatever happened, she added softly, it's coming back for you. Frank's pulse picked up again, though not from panic, from recognition. Deep inside, he knew she was right. Something had been building long before last night. The pressure, the expectations, the weight he never allowed himself to acknowledge. He swallowed hard. So what do I do? Jessica offered a faint, encouraging smile. Face it, piece by piece. And don't try to handle it alone this time. Her words landed like a quiet anchor. Simple, grounding, undeniable. Frank nodded slowly, trying to steady his breath. The memory wasn't complete yet, but the door was opening. And for the first time, he wasn't terrified of stepping through it. As the weight of the moment settled, Jessica leaned back slightly and glanced toward where the camera would be. With everything getting deeper, she said lightly, don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment. It helps the channel grow and keeps these stories coming. Frank exhaled, his shoulders easing just a bit. The next chapter of his morning, and his truth, waited just beyond the memory he was still afraid to face. Frank remained seated for a moment after their conversation ended, staring at the table as though the answers to his night were hidden beneath the plates. The voices around them faded into background noise. Jessica noticed the way he tensed again. Not the panicked kind of tension, but the sort that comes when someone realizes there's more truth waiting to be uncovered. She set her napkin down and stood. All right, she said, brushing crumbs from her fingers. Let's go. Frank looked up slowly. Go where? To retrace your steps, Jessica replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Sitting here won't unlock your memory. Moving will. He hesitated. Are you sure we should investigate? Yes, she said, tilting her head slightly. Last night left clues, and your brain won't piece anything together unless we give it something to work with. Frank pushed his chair back and sighed. I feel like I'm starring in my own disaster documentary. Jessica shrugged lightly. Well, at least you have a AO host. Her small smile pulled a reluctant laugh from him, easing the tension that clung to his shoulders. They stepped out of the dining area and into the quieter hallway beyond. The polished floor reflected the soft overhead lights, and the distant hum of elevators filled the stillness. Where were you when things started getting blurry? Jessica asked, falling into step beside him. The hallway near the elevators, Frank said. I remember leaning on the wall. Everything else is fog. Then, where we're starting, they reached the spot, a stretch of carpet between two large framed prints. Frank stopped, staring at the pattern beneath his shoes. Something about this exact location stirred a faint pulse of memory. Jessica glanced at him, and he closed his eyes. There it was, a quick flicker, his hand slipping, his voice raised, a sinking feeling in his chest, his phone hitting the floor. He opened his eyes again. I dropped something here. Jessica arched a brow. Your dignity. He shot her a look. My phone? She grinned. That, too. Honestly, they crouched together, scanning the floor and the base of the wall. Jessica's fingers pushed aside a folded corner of a safety pamphlet near the baseboard. Found something, she said. Frank leaned closer. There it was, his phone, wedged partly beneath the wall molding. He reached for it carefully, lifting it into the light. The screen had a visible crack along one side, thin but clear enough to confirm the fall. He exhaled slowly. That's not great. Jessica stood, dusting off her hands. Better than losing it entirely. And now you have part of the story in your hands. Frank held the phone as though it might answer questions on its own. The weight of it felt different now. Heavier, like it carried both the chaos of last night and the truth he wasn't ready to face. Do you think anything else happened here? He asked. Jessica shook her head gently. I think this is where something broke inside you. And when you dropped that phone, it was your way of letting go without meaning to. He swallowed. I'm not used to dropping anything. I know, she said softly. That's why your brain remembers it. A quiet moment passed between them. Not uncomfortable, but thoughtful. Their teamwork didn't feel forced. It felt natural, as though they'd known each other far longer than a single chaotic night. Jessica nudged him lightly with her elbow. Now comes the hard part. Listening to whatever's on this. Right? Exactly, she said. Your call log probably holds the missing piece. Frank stared at the cracked screen. Dread and curiosity, mixing like two halves of a truth he'd been avoiding. What if I don't want to hear it? Jessica stepped closer, her tone steady. Frank, you're not facing this alone. Whatever is on that phone, I'm right here. Her certainty settled him. He wasn't used to someone standing beside him without needing something in return. She did it effortlessly, He gave a small nod. All right, let's find out. Jessica gestured toward the nearby seating nook. Come on. We'll look at it somewhere quiet. As they walked together, Frank glanced at her. The woman who pulled him out of a stranger's bed, guided him through embarrassment, and now stood beside him as he unraveled the emotional knots of his night. Their steps matched. Their energy matched. And somewhere between fear and hope, something steady formed. A quiet connection neither of them spoke aloud. But soon, the device in his hand would reveal everything. And Frank knew the next moment could change everything he thought he understood about last night. They sat down in a small seating area tucked beside the hallway. 2 armchairs and a low wooden table positioned near a tall window. The morning light filtered through the glass, resting across the floor in a soft glow. It was quiet here, separated from the movement of hotel guests and the clatter of breakfast dishes, a perfect place to face a truth Frank wasn't sure he was ready for. He held the cracked phone in both hands, staring at the dark screen as if it were a sealed door. Jessica watched him silently, sensing the heaviness in his breath and the slight tremor in his fingers. She didn't rush him. Take your time, she said gently. Frank nodded, but didn't move. What if I don't want to hear it? You do, she replied. You're just afraid of what you shed. He swallowed, acknowledging the truth in her tone. I've never lost control like this. Not publicly. Not privately either. That's why this matters, she said calmly. You pushed yourself beyond your limit. Your phone recorded the moment your mask slipped. Frank sighed shakily. You make it sound so poetic. It's not poetic, she corrected softly. It's human. Those words eased his shoulders, just enough for him to unlock the phone. The cracked screen lit up, and the call log appeared. His eyes widened immediately. 3 consecutive calls, all to the same number. Jessica leaned closer. Is that the chairman? Frank whispered. 3 times. After 2 in the morning, Jessica let out a slow exhale. You weren't just emotional. You were reaching out. Frank felt the tension rise in his throat. Why would I call him repeatedly? What could I possibly have been trying to say? She touched his arm gently, a grounding gesture that steadied him more than he expected. Whatever happened, you're alone now. His breath caught. Her reassurance hit deeper than she realized. Slowly, he tapped the voicemail icon. 1 new message. Timestamp 2:42 a.m. He hesitated again. Frank? Jessica said quietly. Play it. We're right here. His thumb pressed the screen. A soft click. Then static, and the muffled sound of him fumbling the phone. And then his own voice, raw and cracked, filled the quiet hallway. Listen, I can't keep doing this. Frank's eyes widened. He barely recognized the sound of himself, stripped of restraint, stripped of composure. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. His voice continued. Every day I wake up carrying what feels like a whole building on my shoulders. Jessica's expression softened, compassion rising. Voicemail Frank went on, breathing uneven. You all want progress, numbers, results, while I'm trying to hold myself together. I keep telling myself I can handle it, that I'm built for this. But I'm not. I'm done lying about it. Frank lowered the phone, stunned, but Jessica placed her hand over his and gently moved it back up. Don't stop, she whispered. Need to hear this. His voice from last night resumed, thinner now, like he'd reached the part where words took effort. I've given everything I have, and somehow it's never enough. I'm tired. I'm angry. I'm scared of disappointing everyone. I'm scared of failing. And I'm scared that if I keep going like this, I'll lose myself completely. Frank closed his eyes briefly, fighting the tightness in his chest. Jessica tightened her grip on his arm, silently promising she wouldn't let him face this alone. The voicemail continued. I don't want to be perfect anymore. I don't want to carry the weight of being the one everyone depends on. I just want someone to see me. Not the title, not the success. Me. There was a pause, a long one, and then a weary sigh. I'm done pretending. I'm done running, and I'm done hiding how much this hurts. The message ended with a faint sound of him dropping the phone again, followed by the final click. Silence filled the seating nook. Frank looked down, breathing slowly, shaken by the honesty he hadn't realized lived inside him. For a moment, he didn't speak. Couldn't speak? Jessica didn't try to fill the silence. She kept her hand on his arm, giving him space to process. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know I felt all of that. You did, she said softly. You were just too busy holding everything together to admit it. He nodded, fighting the emotion pressing behind his ribs. I've never said those words out loud before. Maybe you needed to, Jessica replied. And maybe last night was the first time your heart spoke louder than your responsibilities. Frank looked at her, the weight of everything settling, but not crushing, not with her there. This voicemail wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror, and Jessica was the one steady enough to help him face it. Frank was still holding the phone when the vibration startled him. It buzzed against his palm hard enough to make him flinch. Jessica looked down at the screen, her brows lifting slightly. That's him, she murmured. Frank stared at the caller ID, the same name that appeared 3 times in his late-night call log. His heartbeat climbed fast and uneven, not out of fear of being fired, but out of fear of what he might have said that the voicemail hadn't captured. Jessica touched his knee gently. Answer it, she said softly. You're stronger now than you were last night. Frank inhaled, exhaled, and pressed the screen. Hello? His voice was composed, but the tremor beneath it betrayed everything. Frank, the chairman's tone wasn't cold or stern. Well, calm, control, almost gentle. A tone Frank had never heard from him before. "Yes, sir," Frank replied quietly, bracing himself. "I got your message," the chairman said. "All of it." Frank closed his eyes, waiting for the blow. But instead, the man sighed. Not a frustrated sigh, a tired one. "I didn't call to reprimand you," he continued. "I called because I heard something in your voice last night that I should have heard a long time ago." Frank blinked, caught off guard. "Sir, you've been carrying too much," the chairman said plainly. "I've watched you push beyond every expectation, meet every deadline, take on every responsibility without hesitation. I assumed you could handle it because you always did." Frank swallowed hard, "But hearing you last night..." The chairman paused, searching for the right words. "I realized I never stopped to ask if you needed help." Jessica glanced at Frank, her eyes softening as she listened to the tone shifting on the other end. The chairman continued, "We've built a work culture that demands too much and breaks people without meaning to. Last night didn't show weakness. It showed truth. And it's time we address that truth properly." Frank let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His shoulders eased, but he didn't speak yet. "Frank," the chairman said, "I want you to come see me when you return from Michigan. Not to discipline you, not to question your commitment, but to talk, to reorganize some things, to lighten the load, and to make sure you're supported the way you should have been all along." Frank's eyes burned slightly. Not tears, but relief tightening behind them. "Sir, I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Start by taking care of yourself," the chairman said. "And when we meet, we'll figure out the rest together." Frank nodded, even though he knew the chairman couldn't see him. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Truly, one more thing," the chairman added, his tone gentler now. "Don't apologize for last night. You were honest. That was the one thing I needed to hear." The call ended. Frank lowered the phone slowly, staring at it before lifting his gaze toward Jessica. She watched him with a small smile, warm, steady, the kind that carried reassurance without needing explanation. "Well?" she asked. "He wasn't angry," Frank said, almost in disbelief. "He actually understood." Jessica leaned back, letting relief wash over her features too. "I told you, people aren't as predictable as you think. I thought my career was over," he murmured. "Instead, you just opened a door," she replied. "A big one." Frank struggled to put the feeling into words. It wasn't just relief at being safe professionally. It was relief at being heard, truly heard, for the first time in years. He finally said, "I didn't realize how much of myself I'd been hiding." Jessica nodded, slowly. "Most people don't. Not until something cracks." They sat quietly for a moment. the weight of the morning shifting into a softer atmosphere. The tension that had followed them since dawn finally loosened, replaced by something steady and shared. Frank looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had stayed beside him through every embarrassing detail, who didn't flinch at the truth, who held his arm as he listened to his own breaking point. "Jessica," he said gently, "thank you for everything." She shrugged lightly, though her eyes warmed again. "I didn't do anything special. You did more than you think." Their gazes held for a moment longer than either intended. Not romantic, not yet, but meaningful. A connection forming quietly, built from honesty and vulnerability, not convenience. Jessica tapped his knee. "Come on. We survived another emotional episode. Let's not sit here until lunch." Frank huffed a soft laugh. "Right." But as they stood, he knew the truth. Today changed something. Not just with his career, not just with Jessica, but inside himself. The morning had begun with confusion. Now, for the first time in a long time, clarity was breaking through. They left the quiet seating area where the voicemail had changed everything. Frank walked slowly, still absorbing the weight of his own words from the night before. Jessica matched his pace without speaking, giving him room to process. The hotel corridor stretched ahead of them, empty except for the gentle hum of air vents and the distant ding of an elevator. When they reached a small alcove near a decorative plant, Jessica stopped. "Frank," she said softly, touching his forearm, "we need to talk before we go any further." He paused, startled by the seriousness in her tone. Jessica was warm, humorous, steady, but rarely solemn. This different. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly. She took a breath, folding her hands in front of her. "What I'm about to say, I didn't plan on sharing, but after everything you just heard on that voicemail, I think you deserve honesty from me, too." Frank leaned lightly against the wall, bracing himself. "I'm listening." Jessica's eyes lifted to meet his, steady, sincere, and carrying something more vulnerable than he had seen from her all morning. "I didn't stay with you last night just because you were drunk," she began. "Yes, I helped you because you needed it. But that wasn't the whole reason." Frank blinked slowly. "Then why did you stay?" Her gaze softened. "Because you said something that caught me off guard. Something real." He felt a quiet tension rise. Not fear, anticipation. "What did I say?" "You said you wished someone would see you," she whispered. "Not your position, not your image. You said you were tired of living up to expectations no one asked if you even wanted." Frank's breath stilled. He had felt those truths buried deep for months, maybe years. But hearing that he had spoken them aloud made his chest tighten. Jessica continued, "I have met a lot of people, Frank. People who hide behind jokes, behind jobs, behind attitudes. But last night, for a moment, you let all of that fall away. You were honest, painfully honest. And not in a dramatic way, just in a way that showed how tired you are. She paused, watching his reaction carefully. You said, she went on, that you were afraid nobody cared about the man behind the decisions. Frank lowered his eyes. He didn't remember saying it, but he felt the truth in every word. Jessica took a small step closer. And the thing is, I understood that more than you realize. Frank lifted his gaze again. Why? Because I know what it feels like to be strong all the time, she replied quietly. To be the one everyone expects to hold everything together. To be dependable, responsible, unshaken. People assume you're fine because you don't fall apart in front of them, but they don't know how heavy it gets. Her voice didn't break, but it carried depth, lived experience, quiet resilience. Frank's expression softened. Jessica, so, yes, she said. I stayed because you needed someone, but I also stayed because, for the first time in a long time, I met someone who reminded me of myself. Someone who hides their exhaustion behind success and structure. A gentle stillness filled the space. Jessica looked down briefly, then back up at him with a clarity that left no room for misinterpretation. You're a good man, pretending to be a perfect one, she said simply, and I saw that last night. Frank felt the words hit him deeper than the voicemail had. The chairman understood his pressure, but Jessica understood his heart. There was a difference. A bold, undeniable difference. He let the silence breathe between them, not rushing to respond. Jessica didn't fidget or look away. She stood in her truth, giving him space to absorb hers. Finally, he said in a low voice, I didn't think anyone could see past my title. I did, she said gently, and not because you told me who you are, but because you showed me who you were when everything else slipped away. Frank swallowed, emotion tightening behind his ribs. Not pain this time, but recognition. Jessica hadn't just been a witness to his worst night. She had seen the person underneath the polished exterior. He'd spent years perfecting, and instead of stepping back, she stepped closer. Frank didn't move at first. He stood there in the quiet hotel alcove, Jessica's words echoing inside him with startling clarity. He had spent years building a reputation. Calm, controlled, capable. A reputation so polished that people assumed he didn't feel the same weight they did, that he didn't crack, that he didn't break. Yet here Jessica stood, having seen him at his lowest, and instead of recoiling, she understood. He exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand across the back of his neck. I don't know how you saw all of that in one night. Jessica gave a soft smile. You weren't hiding as much as you think. That's the scary part, Frank admitted. I've always kept my guard up. Always. And you saw straight through it without even trying. I wasn't trying to expose anything, she said gently. It was just there. You were exhausted, hurting, and finally honest for once. Most people never reach that point with someone else. Frank looked at her, studying the openness in her expression. There was no judgment, no pity, just understanding. The kind that settles deep and anchors itself. He let out a shaky breath. Hearing what I said last night, I didn't realize how much I needed someone to listen. You weren't just talking, Jessica replied. You were releasing something you've carried for too long. He leaned back against the wall, processing, piece by piece. People only ever see the CEO. The decisiveness, the structure, the wins. They don't see the man underneath. They don't see the nights I stay awake worrying about decisions that affect hundreds of lives. They don't see the pressure of being the one everyone turns to. Jessica nodded. But I saw you. Not your title. Not your reputation. Just you. Frank's throat tightened again. But in a different way this time. Not from fear, from gratitude. He tilted his head slightly. Why does it matter to you? Jessica's answer came without hesitation. Because I know what it's like to want someone to look past the surface, to want someone to see the parts you don't show the world. The confession held weight, not heavy, but real. Frank felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't prepared for. Silence settled again, but this time it felt warm rather than tense. Jessica stepped a little closer, her presence steady. Last night wasn't some random accident. Not emotionally, anyway. You reached for someone, for connection, even if you don't remember doing it. Frank absorbed her words slowly, then shook his head with a soft laugh. I can't believe I said all that to you. Well, she said, folding her arms playfully, you also told a plant you appreciated its support. So honestly, this was the most meaningful part of your night. He couldn't help smiling, one of the rare, genuine smiles that softened the usually sharp angles of his face. I'm never living that down, am I? Absolutely not, Jessica said, grinning. But it's fine. The plant probably forgives you. The moment eased the emotional density, but the connection between them remained strong, pulsing beneath the humor, pulling them closer emotionally. Frank straightened slightly, the weight in his chest replaced by something lighter, something hopeful. Jessica, he said quietly, I don't know what happens next. I don't even know how to navigate something like this. She tilted her head, curiosity softening her features. Something like what? He gestured vaguely between them. Plus, whatever this is becoming. Her expression softened, her eyes lowering for a moment before meeting his again. I don't think we need to define anything right now. Frank searched her face. What are we supposed to do now? Jessica smiled, a small, knowing smile, with a touch of warmth just beneath the surface. Right now, we breathe. We take the next step without overthinking it. Frank chuckled under his breath. That's harder for me than you realize. Oh, I realize, she teased lightly. Your brain works like a boardroom. Structured, calculated, always forecasting. Guilty, he admitted. But this isn't a strategy meeting, she said gently. This is two people learning each other in real time. Frank nodded slowly, letting that sink in. Jessica looked at him with a softness that held no urgency, no pressure, just openness. You don't have to rush anything. You don't have to impress me. You don't have to be perfect. Just be real. Something loosened inside him. A slow, subtle release that made his shoulders drop and his breath deepen. For the first time in a very long time, Frank felt like a man instead of a title. And Jessica, she was the first person he had allowed close enough to see the difference. Frank's question lingered in the air, quiet, sincere, and edged with vulnerability. He was no longer trying to hide. What are we supposed to do now? Jessica didn't rush to answer. She let the moment breathe, let his honesty settle between them. Then she softened, tilting her head slightly as her expression shifted into something warm and steady. We start simple, she said. Breakfast first, honesty next. Frank blinked, a small laugh rising in his chest despite the emotional weight of the day. Breakfast again? You barely ate the first time, Jessica reminded him. You poked toast like it insulted you. We're fixing that. He shook his head, amused despite himself. You really don't let anything slide, do you? Not when it comes to people going through something, she said. And definitely not when it comes to grown men pretending coffee is a meal. Frank let out a deeper laugh, one that eased the remaining strain in the air. They walked together toward the dining area, their steps unhurried, not because they were stalling, but because clarity was settling between them naturally, without force. As they entered the dining room, it was quieter than earlier. Most morning guests had already left, leaving scattered dishes and the faint scent of waffles behind. Jessica guided him toward a small corner table by the window. Sit, she instructed playfully. Frank obeyed, shaking his head. You talk to me like I'm in trouble. You are, she replied, pulling out her chair. Trouble with dehydration, an empty stomach, and emotional fatigue. He raised both brows. That's accurate. She grinned. Exactly. Jessica grabbed 2 plates, returning with eggs, fruit, and a fresh waffle cut neatly down the middle. She slid half toward him and half toward herself. Frank stared at the plate. You're sharing your waffle? That's how you know it's serious, she teased. He couldn't help smiling. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You still have to eat it. As they began their meal, the earlier heaviness took on a different shape. Not gone, but transformed into something quieter, more reflective. There was an ease between them now, a gentle understanding forming through silence, just as clearly as it had through words. Frank set down his fork after a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends," she said. "Is it about the plant again?" "No," he laughed. "Not this time." She leaned forward. "Then go ahead." He studied her carefully, her calm posture, the soft determination in her eyes, the way she held space for him without crowding him. "You said last night wasn't random, that I reached for someone. Why do you think it was you?" Jessica paused, her expression thoughtful. She didn't look flattered or flustered. She looked honest. "Because we were two lonely people passing each other in a hallway," she said quietly. "And sometimes life puts the right person in the right place when everything else falls apart." Frank absorbed that. It wasn't poetic. It was straightforward and true. "You were tired," she went on. "I was tired. You were looking for someone to hear you, even if you didn't realize it. And I was looking for something real, someone who wasn't pretending." Frank nodded slowly. Her words didn't just make sense. They felt true. "I didn't think anyone could see me the way you do," he admitted. "You weren't letting anyone," she replied softly. "But last night, you cracked open. And today, you're choosing to stay open. That says a lot." He looked down at his plate, then back up. "You know, I haven't had a real conversation like this in years." "I can tell," she said kindly. "You're used to giving instructions, not emotions." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Yeah, and you're used to giving clarity I didn't know I needed." Jessica smiled. "That's what honesty does. It makes people clearer to themselves." The air warmed between them again, not intense, but gentle, like two people walking toward the same truth without rushing. Frank leaned back slightly, his voice measured but sincere. "Jessica, whatever this is becoming, I want to understand it." "You will," she said, "but we take it slow. Truth first. Everything else later." He nodded, accepting the pace she set. Patient, steady, real. Jessica glanced toward the invisible audience beyond the camera space. "And while we're talking about connection, if you're still here watching this story unfold, make sure you hit that like button. Your support helps channel grow." Frank smiled faintly at her effortless shift in tone. As they returned to their breakfast, something subtle but unmistakable had changed. Not love, not yet, but a door had opened quietly, naturally, and neither of them was stepping back. The dining room had nearly emptied by the time Frank and Jessica stood from their table. The quiet clatter of distant dishes and the soft hum of hotel staff resetting the space faded behind them as they stepped into the corridor again. The warmth of their shared conversation lingered, not heavy, not awkward, just present, like a subtle glow trailing behind them. They walked side by side toward the elevators, unhurried, the silence between them comfortable rather than uncertain. Frank slipped his hands into his pockets, not out of discomfort, but because he finally felt settled enough to let them rest there. Jessica walked with her usual confident ease, each step grounded, steady, reflecting the same calm that had guided him through the chaos of the morning. As they moved down the hallway, Frank found himself glancing at her, not covertly, not nervously, just long enough to acknowledge the quiet shift happening inside him. He didn't quite recognize the version of himself who had woken up panicked and confused hours earlier. That man had been overwhelmed, unsteady, and wrapped tightly in expectations he didn't know how to escape. This version, the one walking beside Jessica, felt different. Not perfect, not healed, but present. Jessica noticed his reflective mood and nudged his shoulder lightly. "You're thinking too loud again." Frank looked over at her with a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Always," she replied. "Your face gives away more than you think." He chuckled under his breath. "I guess I'm still getting used to not hiding everything." "Good," she said simply. "Hiding takes too much energy." Frank considered her words as they approached the long carpeted stretch leading to the elevator bank. He had spent years holding himself together so tightly that even breathing had sometimes felt like a chore. The idea that he didn't have to carry everything alone. That new, unsettling, but freeing. He let out a slow sigh, more reflective than weary. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't expect any of this. Not the confusion, not the embarrassment, not the honesty, and definitely not someone helping me make sense of it." Jessica gave him a soft, almost amused look. "Life doesn't usually schedule breakdowns and breakthroughs at convenient times." "That's generous," Frank said. "Last night felt like the opposite of convenient. But today," she replied, "is turning into something else entirely." Frank felt that truth settle in his chest. Something had changed, not in the world around him, but inside him. He wasn't sure when it happened. Maybe when he saw the cracked phone. Maybe when he heard the voicemail. Maybe when Jessica stayed, listened, and didn't flinch. He cleared his throat. "Jessica, earlier, when you said you stayed because you saw me, the real me." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "I don't think I've let anyone see me in a long time." "I know," she said gently, "and I'm grateful you didn't run from it." Jessica slowed her pace slightly, turning her head to look at him more fully. "Frank, everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves a moment to admit they're tired. You just happened to hit that moment in a hotel hallway at 2 a.m. He winced lightly. "Not most impressive moment." She shrugged playfully. "Maybe not, but it was real. And real is better than perfect." Frank stopped walking for a moment, absorbing that. Jessica paused beside him. The elevator just a few steps away. He took a careful breath, steady and full. "You helped me remember something I forgot along the way." "What's that?" "That I'm human." Jessica's expression softened, a warmth rising in her eyes. You always were. You just needed someone to remind you. Frank felt something shift again, a quiet, grounding awareness. Jessica wasn't saving him. She wasn't fixing him. She was showing him the part of himself he had neglected while trying to live up to an impossible image. The elevator dinged softly, signaling its arrival. But neither of them stepped forward immediately. Jessica tucked a curl behind her ear and asked, "So, where do we go from here?" Frank didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't know, but because for the first time he didn't feel pressured to have the perfect response. Instead, he allowed himself one simple truth. "Forward," he said gently, "wherever that leads." Jessica smiled. Not wide, not dramatic, but genuine. A beginning. And as the elevator doors slid open, they stepped inside together. Not as two strangers from a chaotic night, but as two people walking toward possibility with open eyes and unguarded hearts. The elevator ascended with a gentle hum, its mirrored walls reflecting the quiet stillness forming between them. Frank stood on one side, hands relaxed at his sides, now rather than tucked in tension. Jessica stood beside him, her posture easy, eyes forward, but occasionally flicking toward him with subtle awareness. For a moment, neither spoke, not out of discomfort, but out of the kind of silence that comes when something meaningful is forming, and neither person wants to interrupt it too soon. When the elevator reached their floor, the doors opened with a soft slide. They stepped out together, walking slowly toward the same hallway where their morning had begun in confusion, only now with clarity trailing behind them. Frank glanced at Jessica, studying the way she moved with quiet confidence. He admired it, not because it contrasted with him, but because it steadied him. "Jessica," he said softly. She stopped, turning toward him. "Yeah? I have a meeting with the chairman when I get back," he began. "A real one. Not the kind that involves, well, emotional voicemails at 2 in the morning. She gave him a playful smirk. "I should hope not." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "I'm not sure how that conversation is going to go." Even though he sounded understanding today, "I know it's going to be heavy. Necessary, but heavy." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "That kind of conversation usually is." He hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from care. "After I meet with him, I'd like to see you again." Jessica's expression softened instantly, the playfulness fading into something sincere. "I was hoping you'd say that." Her honesty warmed him in a way that felt new, gentle, steady, and unforced. "I don't know what this is yet," Frank admitted. "I don't even know how to define the last several hours." "Good," Jessica replied with a smile. "Don't define it. Just acknowledge it." Frank exhaled slowly. "All right, then I'll just say this. Being around you feels different." "Different how?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and answered without rehearsing it in his mind, a first for him. "It feels like the world isn't resting entirely on my shoulders. Jessica's eyes softened at that. That's because it never was. You just convinced yourself it had to be? He nodded, accepting the truth in her words. Maybe so, but you helped me see things clearly. More clearly than I've seen in years. Jessica's voice lowered with sincerity. And you helped me too, Frank. More than you realize. He tilted his head slightly. How? She gave a gentle shrug. I've been moving through life taking care of everyone else, being the one who's always strong. I forgot what it felt like to connect with someone who wasn't afraid to be real in front of me, even if the real came out under questionable circumstances. He laughed softly. I suppose waking up in a stranger's room isn't the most traditional way to start a meaningful connection. Maybe not, she said, smiling, but it's ours. And it's honest. Frank absorbed that, letting the reality of their situation settle between them. Not heavy, not confusing, but understood. So, Jessica murmured, after your meeting, you'll call me? I will, he said, without hesitation. I want to tell you how it goes. Not as the CEO trying to impress someone. Just as me. Jessica stepped a little closer, enough that her presence felt warm, but not overpowering. Good, because that's the version I want to see. Frank felt a quiet shift again, the kind that didn't come with panic or uncertainty, but with clarity. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew this. He didn't want this connection to end in the hotel hallway. He didn't want their morning to disappear into memory. He didn't want Jessica to remain a stranger who happened to save him from himself. What are we calling this? He asked gently. Jessica smiled. Thoughtful. We're not calling it anything yet. We're just acknowledging it's real and giving it room to grow. Frank nodded slowly, appreciating her pacing. Steady, grounded, aligned with exactly what he needed. Then we'll let it grow, he said softly. Exactly, she replied. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people moving forward. He smiled, a small, genuine smile that came easily now. Jessica returned it, and in that shared moment, without labels or plans, something real took root. Not certainty, not promises, but possibility, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't demand, doesn't overwhelm. They stood together at the quiet end of the hallway, framed by soft morning light, spilling in through a narrow window. The world outside moved with its usual pace. Cars on the street, guests checking out, conversations drifting from the lobby. But inside this hallway, everything felt still. Not paused, not uncertain. Just still enough for one final truth to settle between them. Frank took a slow breath, feeling a kind of calm he hadn't known he needed. Jessica stood next to him, arms relaxed at her sides. Not pushing, not pulling. Simply present. The kind of presence that didn't demand anything, but made everything feel possible. I'm glad we met, he said quietly. Jessica looked up at him, her eyes softened by sincerity. I am too. even if the circumstances were unusual. Frank let out a warm laugh. That's a generous way of putting it. Well, she said, shrugging lightly, I've learned life doesn't always care about introductions. It just drops people where they need to be. He nodded slowly. I needed this. I needed you. She didn't blush or shift or act surprised. Instead, she gave him a gentle, grounding smile. You needed someone to tell the truth to. I just happened to be in the hallway. Still, he replied, you could have walked past me. Jessica tilted her head. Frank, you weren't someone to walk past. Something warm moved through him. He didn't reach for her, didn't step closer. He didn't need to. The connection between them didn't require big gestures. It lived in the quiet acknowledgement that they had changed each other in ways neither had expected. They walked together toward the elevator again, not rushing. Their steps matched easily, as though they had been walking in sync far longer than a morning. Frank spoke softly. You know, last night I was convinced everything was falling apart. And today? She asked. He exhaled. Today feels like the first time I'm putting myself back together. Jessica nodded slowly. That's what happens when you stop carrying everything alone. They reached the elevator, and Frank pressed the button. The soft mechanical click filled the small space between them. You really helped me see myself differently, he said. You did that, Jessica replied. Just held up the mirror. Frank smiled at the metaphor, but it hit him deeper than she knew. For years, his identity had been tied to performance, to the expectations of others, to the image he felt forced to maintain. But today he felt human again. Not perfect, not polished, just human. The elevator arrived with a gentle ding. Before the doors opened, Jessica turned to him. Frank, she said quietly, whatever happens next, don't disappear into that old version of yourself again. The world may expect you to hold everything together, but you don't owe anyone perfection. He nodded, taking her words in like a promise he intended to keep. And don't disappear on me either, she added, her tone soft but certain. I won't, he said. I meant what I said. After my meeting, I'll call you. Good, she replied, her smile widening slightly, because I'd like to know how your story continues. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside together, and though the ride was silent, the emotion between them wasn't. When the doors opened again on her floor, Jessica stepped out, but turned back to hold his gaze one last time. This morning was unexpected, she said. It was necessary, he replied. She nodded. Then let's see where necessary takes us. Frank watched her walk toward her room, calm, steady, confident, and felt a rare sense of anticipation rising in his chest. Not anxiety, not worry, possibility, the kind that lingers. The kind that changes people. As the elevator doors closed again, her words echoed in his mind. This wasn't an ending. It wasn't even a beginning with certainty. It was a step toward something honest. Sometimes the most embarrassing moment of your life isn't a downfall. It's a turning point. Sometimes the stranger you wake up next to isn't a mistake. They're the reflection of the truth you've been avoiding. And sometimes losing control isn't a failure. It's exactly how you find yourself again. Because clarity doesn't always arrive through calm moments. Sometimes it shows up at 2 a.m. in the wrong hotel room, next to someone who sees you for who you are instead of who you pretend to be. And that is how a new beginning quietly takes its first breath. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect on your own journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your support keeps these powerful stories alive on Mr. Michael Stories Hub.